Considine in the energy team there, and I chair AREG's Professional Services Network, which is a network that's been established both to showcase people in the professional services sector that are involved in energy, in particular the transition to renewable energy, and also to share with our members interesting topics from their various specialisms. And so we're really blessed today to be joined by a fantastic panel for today's topic, which is renewable energy shift, leading the change for a sustainable future. Today, we're very lucky to be joined by Thomas Carger. And Thomas Carger's a patent partner at Marks & Clark Patent Attorneys, and he is part of the firm's energy and environmental team. He's got many years of experience in the UK and Canada, helping companies of all sizes to protect and maximise the value of their innovations. Thomas will be the first presenter today, and he'll be followed by Nicola Gray, who I'll give a brief introduction to after Thomas's presentation, and following that, Pam Wilson, who I'll also give a brief introduction in relation to. So without further ado, over to Thomas Krager of Marks & Clark. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you. I guess that's my cue to appear on your screen. Hopefully everyone can see me. I'll share my screen now so you can see what I'll be presenting. Can someone let me know they can see that all right?
Yeah, we can see that fine.
Excellent.
Okay.
Just before Thomas gets going, sorry, another housekeeping matter, just to let you know that the session is being recorded. Apologies, I didn't mention that earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. And thank you for the introduction and for putting this all together, and for the team at AREG for putting this all together. I know a lot of work goes on in the background and a lot of chasing of us goes on, so that's very much appreciated. So as Rod said, we're going to be speaking about this renewable energy shift, and that's quite a mouthful. So it sort of means maybe different things for the three of us speaking today. From my point of view, it's very much related to the technical and to a shift maybe in innovation and the innovation landscape that's happening in the energy sector, and specifically in Aberdeen in the UK. And I'm not going to spoil the other panelist discussions, but as I understand it, Nicola might be looking more at the people side of things, while Pam will discuss more about the communication aspect and her personal transition. But as I say, I'm looking at more of the technology aspect for all of this. And just by way of introduction, Rod gave a little introduction to myself, but our firm, Marks & Clark, for those of you who don't know, is an international intellectual property firm. We have 15 offices across 3 continents with over 300 professionals, and those range from patent attorneys like myself, people with technical backgrounds, trademark attorneys, IP barristers, and IP litigators. And we have decades of experience working with companies of all sizes in the energy sector, whether they're operators or tier 1, or right down to sort of in the garage inventors. And as Rod said, I'm a partner and part of the energy environments team, UK and European patent attorney. And prior to this, I worked in Canada. Prior to joining this profession, I worked in Canada in the nuclear industry, first in the design office and then in the field office. So while it's not quite oil and gas, I very much have energy in my veins, hopefully not glowing green. And getting to the heart of the matter, you may have seen this before, this is a TRL levels, but getting to the heart of the matter, the issue that the policy makers are asking themselves is, what do we need to meet this energy transition? What's required to get to net zero and to meet the sustainable goals that are being set? And one of the organizations doing that is the International Energy Association, the IEA, that's come up with several different scenarios of a world energy outlook to 2070. And one of them is called the Sustainable Development Scenario, which I'll highlight in a moment. And that Sustainable Development Scenario looks at what technology is required and what the state of current technology is to meet those net zero targets of the future. And that's why this TRL level is important. Thank you for whoever turned off their mic there. TRLs provide a common framework to compare technology maturity across various sectors. And you can see that as a concept moves from, excuse me, from TRL 1, 2, and 3 when it's still in the conceptual phase down to prototyping, demonstration, adoption, and maturity, the concept becomes more flushed out, more complete, but also the level of risk reduces and the additional innovation required. You can imagine that when a concept is initially formed, there's still quite a lot of more needed to bring it to the prototype stage. There's still a lot of you, I mean, I'm sure many of you have found this when you're developing a product, when you're developing a service, as you prototype it, as you start to demonstrate it, you still innovate on top of that, you still make changes. And so it could be that there's still quite a bit of innovation to go from TRL 6 to TRL 11, for example. And that's what's highlighted on this next slide. As I said, the IEA came up with this sustainable development scenario. So what's required to meet net zero targets all the way past 2050, all the way to 2070? And said what stage are the various technologies at. And this color coding matches the TRL levels I just showed in the previous slide. And it highlights really that a huge chunk of technology, let's say 35% looking at that yellow and orange band, is still at a very low TRL level, meaning there's still a lot of work required to bring it all the way up to a mature level. And I'm not talking about necessarily government backing or funding or those elements. From my point of view as a patent practitioner, I'm talking about the innovation required to go from a prototype to a good idea to mature in the market, fully adopted. And that takes time, that takes innovation. And we've seen this play out in the past. Solar, photovoltaics, lithium batteries took 10, 20, 30 years before they were fully mature and adopted from the very early stages of when they were prototyped. So what we're seeing in this transition to new technologies, especially places like hydrogen and carbon capture, is that there's still a lot of innovation and there's still a lot of companies needing to innovate to get to the space they want to in those markets. And there's essentially two different kinds of companies that are entering the markets. They're the companies that are existing conventional energy companies that are looking to transition into renewable new sectors. And then there are those companies that perhaps aren't energy companies, but have knowledge of applications in that new sector that are then looking to use their technology. So for example, you think of AI, you think of additive manufacturing, obviously all the sensor Internet of Things that have use cases in the energy sector that are transitioning, or even small, medium enterprises transitioning. And all of those companies face a variety of IP challenges and opportunities that are available to them. And I've highlighted some of them here below. And essentially, as I said, we're talking about a company entering a new market, whether it's a new renewable market or whether it can be a new geographic market. And when doing that, their challenges they might face is that they don't know what third-party IP, what competitors exist in that space, and what might limit their commercial activities. They have a good awareness of what the competitors are in their conventional market in oil and gas, for example, but they don't know who operates in wind, for example, and they don't know what competitors are out there, what IP they have that might restrict their commercial activities. The other risk and opportunity that's on both sides there is reputation. And this often comes up in the form of greenwashing that I'm sure many of you have heard of before. That's been on in the public consciousness since British Petroleum went to BP. Shell got dinged a couple of times. Total has gotten in some trouble lately. Being very careful about what you claim, what aspirations you make, making them very specific, not making them vague, making sure you have proof points can ensure that reputation goes from being a challenge to being an opportunity where you can really show the public that's really well educated in these things how your brand and your company supports the energy transition. The other point there is the opportunity around existing IP, your own existing IP, so long as you've conducted some level of due diligence. And I don't necessarily mean due diligence around ownership, but perhaps around what the subject matter of the IP covers, could be an opportunity to cover the protection in the new market. So does your patent, for example, specifically relate to an oil and gas well, or does it simply say a well bore, and therefore it can be fit for use for geothermal well as well as an oil and gas well? That represents the level of due diligence you should be considering if you're transitioning to a new market. And a case study around the challenges, I'm going to present a brief case study around the challenges that companies can encounter when making this transition. And it all centers around the Dogger Bank wind farm, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. I'll show these images now so you can try and digest it, because it gets a little legalese. So Dogger Bank, for those that who don't know, is a planned 3.6 gigawatt wind farm, about 130 to 190 kilometers, depending on the phase, off the north coast of England. At one point, it was said to be the world's largest offshore wind farm. I'm not sure if that's still the case. Regardless, GE was providing what they branded as their Halide X wind turbines to this wind farm. They were providing them all over the world, including the US. And it turned out that Siemens had a patent that they felt GE's provision of these Halide X wind turbines infringed. So Siemens has a patent. GE is providing a product that Siemens alleges infringes the patent. Now, the thing is, the way the patent was written, it wasn't infringed when GE imported the turbine, the Halide X, to the UK. It was only infringed when the components were all installed on the wind farm, fixed to the seabed at Dogger Bank. So there was a different question around infringement that came to the fore because of the change in market, because it wasn't just an onshore turbine, instead it was an offshore turbine. And this all came out in what's pictured on the screen there on your right, the territorial waters, and how patent infringement is determined when it comes to on UK, in the UK territorial waters, and in what's called the UK exclusive economic zone. And I promise that this will be the most legal jargon that I speak, but the Patent Act allows for two additional interface with the two additional acts, the Continental Shelf Act and the Petroleum Act. And the Continental Shelf Act says acts that occur in certain designated locations, like an oil and gas platform, might constitute infringement, and they fall under the scope of the Patent Act. The Petroleum Act says that certain acts that are what's called purpose limited to what I've just put up there, activities connected with the exploration or the exploitation of natural resources of the shore or bed of waters, those might fall under the scope of the UK Patents Act. So if the act that you're taking in this scope of area that's away from the UK territorial waters, but within the exclusive economic zone, so up to 370 kilometers away from the UK, if it relates to exploration or exploitation of the natural resources, it could be patent infringement. But if it doesn't, it's not within the scope of the Patents Act. We're not even going to consider it. It can't be infringement. And what the UK court found in this case, they found that, among other reasons, the patent wasn't infringed for technical reasons, but they also found that the activity related to installing a wind turbine didn't fall under the scope of the Patent Act because it wasn't exploitation or exploration of the natural resources in the same way that drilling and pulling out the black stuff is exploration and exploitation. So if you had drilled and retrieved oil and gas, that would have fallen under the scope of the Patent Act. But because you were installing a wind turbine, and sure, you were fixing it to the seabed, but that's not exploitation of the natural resources, according to the court, your actions didn't fall under the scope of the Patents Act. And this is the risk that Siemens took when they were looking to assert their patent in this new area. The patent was completely appropriate for any fixed turbines installed in the UK on the land, but all of a sudden it became inappropriate for use when they were doing it in this area away from the territorial waters in 130 kilometers, 170 kilometers, which you can imagine is only going to get farther and farther when it gets to floating wind, etc. And this could have all been resolved if they had really paid attention to the language of their patent and be careful to craft it in the right way. So sorry if I went on about that a little bit too much. It's the section that gets me the most excited, I guess, because it's a legal jargon point. I'm aware that I'm starting to run a bit long, so I'll try and get to these points quite quickly. Another question that commonly comes up when you're looking to new markets, you might know where to protect your IP, where to protect your innovation quite well for conventional energy, but it might be less clear for new energies such as hydrogen. And you really have to go back to basics with this. You have to consider, where are your markets? Where are you going to be selling to? Where's your supply chain? Where are the technology hubs? And where are the competitors? And what we often recommend clients to do to save on cost, because so many clients want to file everywhere, but it gets very expensive very quickly, is to have a bit of a tiered approach. So when it comes to your core technology, your tier one technology, let's say related to potential hydrogen use cases, you say, I know that the US, Europe, and China are key markets, so I'm definitely going to protect there. South Korea and Japan seem to be developing something, so I'm also going to protect there. And India seems to be a market of potentially of the future. Patents are 20 years, so I'm going to file there because patents are all territorial rights. When it comes to secondary innovations that are less important, I'm not going to file in India. I'm not going to incur that additional cost. And when it comes to tertiary inventions that are maybe more, we'll see if we go into that sector ever. We'll just stick to the US, Europe, and China and not include South Korea and Japan. And by doing this, you can ensure that your costs are fixed while you have a legitimate strategic vision around your filing strategy. So when it comes to exiting, you can really defend your position and explain everything, which just increases the value of the company and of any investments. So I'm sorry if I've ran a little bit over. That's my information there. I'm happy to take questions at the end, as Rod said, but I'll pass it back now to Rod to hand over to the next speaker.
Much appreciated. So yeah, absolutely agree that it's an interesting point that you need to understand the bandwidth of your claim, if you like, when you're trying to apply it to a different sector. And I totally agree that it's never too early to consult with a lawyer. So for me, that was a key moment in your presentation. And also your point about reputation and greenwashing, presumably absolutely important. You can't just pay lip service to it. There has to be integrity. And thankfully, we've got a PR guru lined up to talk to you all later around the kind of PR and marketing aspect of the transition. So thank you very much for that, Thomas, and you didn't overrun at all, so perfectly done. Well, now our next presenter is my colleague, Aberdeen Constein, Nicola Gray, who is an incredibly talented employment lawyer, and she's an accredited specialist in employment law and an advisor with over 15 years experience. Now, Nicola supports employers across a range of industries, providing commercially focused advice to guide our clients through the full spectrum of the employment relationship to better enhance their personal management and safeguard their business from employment-related risks. So without further ado, over to you, Nicola. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rod, for that glowing introduction. I'm sure you're just looking for some form of curly-whirly or double-decker in the next time that you're in the office, but I'm sure I'll deposit something on your desk. As Thomas mentioned, when he's looking at the repurposing of tech and patents in relation to the transition towards renewables, I was going to touch upon how we might repurpose people if we don't want to commoditize them just quite so much, but that's where we're looking at a recognition of the workforces that we currently have, as they're, I think, going to be critical in relation to the move towards the renewables. So these are the topics that I'm looking to cover. I will try to keep an eye on the time, but I've now lost my clock. So I've relied on Pam to cut me off if I'm going to run over just too much on that front. So a little bit on employee communications, as the people piece there can go in many different directions, touching on training and also the shape of the workforce that we currently have and what it may look in the future. And it would be remiss of me not to deal with the people piece that was announced, obviously, last week or so with the Grangemount announcement. So we will touch briefly on that, as obviously that's a movable feast. So looking at the employee communications aspect of that, this will split into a number of points, what you must be saying, what you maybe should be saying, and how you might be saying it is important that's there. And this, when you're looking at the transition of people within the renewable sector, will touch upon whether or not there are acquisitions that might be consolidating businesses, and there are a number of perhaps umbrella companies that are buying and strong arming with a lot of renewable focused, whether that's technology or assets that can then be moved towards the renewable sector. I'm conscious that particularly in this area that there have been a number of consolidation pieces that is there, and so you may have mergers of companies that comes with perhaps legal frameworks as well. Sadly, there may also then be, whether that's as a result of a merger or as a result of a change in focus, there can be changes to headcount, which is the delicate way often of explaining redundancies. And when we're touching on those sorts of regimes, that's when there may be the requirement to have a legal framework of communications will be adopted. So I'll touch first in relation to the mandated communications that you might have, and they are usually born about in relation to whether or not there is a need for collective consultation. Now, collective consultation will be triggered when we're looking at that merger piece, perhaps when we've got the transfer of a relevant transfer and the transfer of people within that. So that's the 2-pay regulations that we'll have on that front. And equally, if we're looking at in the transition piece, collective redundancies. Now, when we look at redundancies, that's not simply a downturn in people. That may be a need to be looking at how those people are employed. And so what that legal framework looks at is a dismissal of the in relation to the contract. So it's not pertaining to the individual person. So we forego anything to do with conduct or capability. Those sorts of dismissals are put to one side. But where an employer anticipates making more than 20 dismissals, straightforward dismissals, within a 90-day period, they will trigger this collective consultation piece. If there's 20 to 99 employees to be affected, then that will be a collective window that must be honoured of 30 days. And if there's over 100 employees, then that's a window of 45 days that must be achieved. Who are we consulting with? I've said designated communicators there on the slide. And what the employer must achieve is communicating with appropriate representatives. And that's obviously in true lawyer fashion. We like to have a phrase that we can then interpret 11 different ways. But in relation to that, when we're saying appropriate representatives, that's when we're looking at engaging with trade unions if they are already in place, or appointing employee representatives if they are not. When we're looking at employee representatives, we're looking to cover the appropriate facets of the affected employees. And that's another phrase that then comes into play when we're looking at collective consultation. And who the affected employees are will differ depending on which regime you're looking at. So if we're looking at a piece when we're looking at terminations, whether that's of contracts with a view to re-engage, and we won't touch, given the time that we have, on the fire and rehire code that is to be coming in the future. But when we're looking at perhaps terminating current employment conditions in order to be able to put everyone onto a similar footing, then there may be a situation where we're dismissing without making redundancies. Otherwise, typically we are looking at redundancies in the collective communications that's required in relation to that. If that is the case, then, as I say, you'll be engaging with employee representatives to be discussing what measures, what impact there might be in relation to the collective consultation for the redundancy piece, how that process might look before you're then looking at individual consultation, which is another mandated piece of communication that must be transferred on the redundancy side to the individuals themselves. If we're looking at the transfer of undertaking side of things, the to-pay aspect that we have there, then we are considering, again, appropriate representatives of the affected employees. Typically, that's a trade union if there is engaged there, or there's the appointment of employee representatives. There are, and recently as there was a slight relaxation of that came into force this summer, where you're looking at who you're adopting there and at what point you need to be engaging with employee representatives as opposed to with the affected employees directly. And that's where if the employer has less than 50 employees altogether, then you don't need to be looking at the employee representatives regime, or if you're looking to transfer only 10 individuals. So depending on what moves might be taken in relation to how you're transitioning towards this greener future, then that will impact perhaps on what regime, if any, you need to adopt in relation to the communications, and whether there is any minimum periods of consultation that you must adopt. To say on the collective consultation for redundancies piece, there's the 30 or 45 days. On the to-pay side of things, it's just in good time, which will depend on what you're looking to do to ensure that there can be an appropriate opportunity for consultation that's effective. The cost of not doing that, and that's what's usually more important to the employer, will depend on the regime as well. And if you fail to collectively consult under the redundancies regime that we have there, then it may be a penalty of up to 90 days pay. On the to-pay side of things, it may be up to 13 weeks pay. So it can be expensive if we're not looking to adopt this there. And so keeping with the vein that's adopted by all lawyer speakers today so far, it's never too early to consult the legal professional to make sure that you're picking up on the right one. Moving just swiftly onto beneficial communications that I've put there. Now, that's what might you want to be advising staff of, that you're not necessarily obliged to tell them. Now, there will be an opportunity to have workforce addresses that you would have a town hall meeting that doesn't necessarily need to lead to a redundancy aspect there, but it may be that it's sensible to... Sorry, too much moving. It may be that it's sensible to be addressing some kind of staff concerns so that they're ensuring that they're positive within the workforce and therefore productive, whilst the transitional piece is still being determined. You know, and often you're looking at them still generating an effective product of output, well, that's not necessarily a thing, but undertaking their services, and the informed employee to an appropriate degree is perhaps then more invested in the future of the company, and until that changes and the direction is otherwise dictated, then you want to ensure that they're pulling in the same direction as the business. I've included a point there on addressing the community, as often these are emotive points, and we've seen that in particular in relation to the Grangemouth announcement, that the impact is not simply on the business that is transitioning, but there's also, as we have seen, the size really of what the oil and gas and the energy sector that we have here. It's not simply on the operators and the supply chain, it's then a very big impact on the locales where these sorts of businesses are situated. And ensuring that your staff are appropriately informed may allow a chance to make sure that the jungle drums are not beating in an adverse direction that we have there. That leads me on to the external communications, and I'll only touch on that briefly because we have got a professional in the room today, but you're considering who can say what. That's important there. Within your workforce, you may well have a situation where senior management will know more, but there may be under greater restriction and protection on confidentiality. They may also have a particular prohibition in relation to saying anything that might adversely affect the business and the business's reputation. It doesn't often flow to all employees, and so that's where you're considering what should be passed on to staff, what's best to let them know so they don't put 2 and 2 together, come up with 5, and then, as I say, that the piece grows onto something that was never intended for it to be. Where there are any such breaches, then that might be a breach of contract, and there might be a situation where you would need to be taking remedial action against the staff. That might be a delicate point to take. But if anybody is saying the wrong thing and too loudly, then there may be action that can be taken by the employer to ensure that that's nipped in the bud. Okay. Turning then briefly to training and what we have there, as there has been a fair bit made in relation to a pool of talent that we have within the current shape of the energy sector, and that with a slight change in focus, that is the best resource that we will have in relation to the move towards renewables. When we're looking at assets being repurposed, the people who currently work the assets are likely to be best placed in order to be able to bring us forward into how that asset may be repurposed for the renewable sector as well. How an employer might assess what current expertise and formal training is in existence within their staff, and what may be needed going forward could be addressed during an appraisal process if that's adopted. And also a number of employers will engage with Skills Development Scotland. They've got local enterprises in certain hotspots across the country, but an opportunity to be just having assessment of staff that's there, and they're a resource that can be pulled on for support if considered appropriate. Briefly mention there the rights to retrain and the time off for retraining, as there is a statutory right to time off for the purposes of seeking training, appropriate training. That applies to larger employers and for employees that have more than 26 weeks service. Otherwise, you're considering, if you're looking to repurpose the focus of your business, then perhaps you're thinking at what may be in your better interests as the employer to ensure that you're utilising the staff you already have, rather than like having to attract and retain fresh talent to be doing that there. Also, there's a right to time off if you have had to undergo the redundancy process and you have got employees with more than 2 years service that are under notice of termination for the reason of redundancy. They're entitled to reasonable time off, and how long is a piece of string, in order to make arrangements for the purposes of retraining for their future. So there are some limited statutory regimes that will apply in relation to retraining. Otherwise, are you agreeing to provide any training opportunity by reason of your contract? And we in the last round, although there was a good number of years ago now, of refinements to employment contracts, we had the requirement of training as a mandatory ingredient in these contracts of employment. So it's returning to what have you agreed to already facilitate if you're looking to change the focus of your business towards the renewable sector. And then, as I say, model what might you think is in your better interests anyway. Looking just swiftly then at the changing shape of the workforce, as the traditional and perhaps impression of the oil and gas industry has perhaps been predominantly male focused. It is a strenuous industry that's there, so it's perhaps attracting more in the offshore assets side of things, those who are in a position to be able to undertake that greater perhaps aspect of manual labour that we have there. But that's changing. and certainly as we're moving towards this shift to in focus to renewables and the push that there has been, particularly in Scotland, for female students of the STEM subjects, that the complement of staff is changing. That's there. Now, as you say, without the phrase that just kind of springs to mind is putting a cat amongst the pigeons. When you've got that change in focus and change of complement they have there has to be a change in consideration as the employer as to how everybody will get on, because when you come from different backgrounds or different needs, then there needs to be a catering for those needs as it comes through. And I just touched briefly on the October changes that's coming in, which is in the focus of sexual harassment and a positive duty on the employer to take preventative steps to avoid sexual harassment. Now that's something that's coming through the Protection of Workers Act that's then being enforced from October, and what are reasonable steps that will depend on the size of the employer that there is there, but just a nod to ensure that everyone is aware of what's coming forward. And sexual harassment is not always to the women, it certainly can be the other way around, and so if you've got a male dominant workforce, then you might have a storming female that's coming in. It might be that she's the one that's harassing the staff, so you have to be considering what you're dealing with in relation to that there. And that's the first port of call when we're looking at any form of defence of such a claim, is did the employer take reasonable steps? And you'll do that by assessing the risk of exposure to sexual harassment in either direction and taking suitable steps, which will likely be raising staff awareness and perhaps engaging in training so that the staff are aware as to what may constitute sexual harassment, as there's a changing focus of the, and there was a very aged and certainly not continuing practice, I trust, of hazing, trainees that would be going out onto assets, that there's a change in acceptance for those that are coming into the work field now, that's not so tolerable. So what might have been engaged as banter previously is not being accepted by those that are less seasoned in the employment experience. Lastly, a brief look at the Grangemouth case study, because it pulled together a few points that I have touched on there. And first of all, in employee communications, if anyone was party to some of the Radio Scotland interviews when the news had first come out, there was a bit of a disparity in relation to who was saying what, because in particular there had been a feel that there was disappointment from the staff that was being interviewed and the trade union officials, understandably, because of the stepping up of the anticipated closure. However, there was a reflective piece in relation to what efforts have already been considered and are underway. For example, this Project Willow that's to be considered, but staff not being aware necessarily of what that might look like. So whilst the picture is not looking positive, it perhaps in some areas wasn't as bleak as it was first thought to be. Also on training, as I say, and that's a critical point there, there's a indicative quite a large number of redundancies, and the collective consultation and process is to be starting imminently. But there is a recognition from some quarters that is a ready-made pool of experts, and it's very important, I think, when we're looking to move on this transition towards renewables, is that we recognise that as a whole industry within energy, and we don't lose who we already have to other parts of the world because they continue to do what they currently do, and that we do need to be stepping in as soon as we're able to in order to be able to retain that talent. Just a reminder, if you've got any questions, to start thinking about those ones and pop them into the chat box for Rod to try to trot over. Any queries, then certainly happy to address them. As Rod has said, I'm an HR professional. We've an opportunity to support businesses such as yourselves through our Access HR forum. And that's the shape of our team, so you don't have to be stuck with me. You might be able to get someone a little bit more suitable, but I'll pass over now to Pam. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. I'll just
Hi, Nicola. Yeah, thank you very much for your enlightening presentation. I mean, you clearly spotlighted the importance of understanding the finer detail of the legal requirements with regard to communication. And it seems that the key is to keep up to date with the fast pace of the evolution of employment law, and also to train your people to make sure that they kind of apply that in the real world. And I guess from a transitional perspective, it's really, I mean, we come across this quite a lot, where I guess businesses in the energy sector have a division that's no longer core for them, but that technology might be useful for someone else in the renewable space, and that business gets, you know, transferred from a kind of traditional hydrocarbon company to a renewables company, and these 2P issues, which are nothing to do with hair pieces, I understand, you know, pop up and dictate what you need to do to kind of make that happen smoothly. So a fantastic presentation, and as you say, good to get some questions at the end for you on that. Next up, we're very lucky to be joined by Pam Wilson, and Pam is Big Partnership, who are a well-known sort of media business and marketing business, and she is head of media relations at Big Partnership International, and has been a key member of the firm's energy team since 2013. Now, interestingly, before joining the Integrated Communications Agency, she spent 4 years in Singapore as a PR manager and swimming instructor, which is you know, quite different sort of things she'll be doing there. And her career began in broadcast journalism, where she spent 17 years working at various local and national UK radio stations, including 7 years as a producer at BBC Radio 2. So over to you, Pam. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Rod, for that lovely introduction. From Big's perspective, we're all about brand and reputation, which both Thomas and Nicola touched on there, and I'll go into in a bit more detail. So my plan today really is to share some insights into how we at Big help our clients with strategic communications as they continue or broaden their energy transition journeys, to make sure that there's cut through both with internal and external audiences, and so that they can gain traction aligned to those overarching objectives. It's crucial really to understand that the pivotal roles that both brand and reputation play in this process, and how a well thought out strategy can facilitate this entry and penetration for long-term success. And it's not a one fit size for all. The renewable sector is of course characterised by its rapid growth and innovation, driven by global efforts to combat climate change and transition to sustainable energy resources. And it's this global push towards sustainable economic growth that's time sensitive for brands. And consumers are becoming increasingly eco-conscious, and companies need to adopt to these challenges and make sure that they're driving a sustainable business environment. And so as a result of this, a lot of companies are coming to us and seeking advice on the best holistic approaches to drive positive change. And this includes all different degrees of repositioning to support that and ensure that brands remain authentic. You know, Thomas touched on the greenwashing there. You really need to consider how things are going to land and make sure that they're evidence-backed, so you can substantiate any claims that you're making if you're going to keep the audience and customer base engaged and on your journey. This could be a total rebrand, or it could be just developing some new messages that sit on your website. It could also be helping to initiate some stakeholder engagement in communities or across governments. Just depends on the brief of each client's needs. And for many companies, it is a very different navigation that's needed across this landscape. And so having people that understand the dynamics is an essential ingredient for making that work. And that's, of course, where us at the Big Partnership come in. So a bit about me then. I'm from Aberdeen, as Rod said. Started out in local radio. I worked at North Sound. I've put up a slide together there of different stations that I've worked at. So I did 4 years at North Sound, cut my teeth in the newsroom there, moved on to working in London, where I worked for Talk Radio, that's now Talk Sport. Then went over to Heart, and then Virgin, where I made the radio show TFI Nightly that was based on TFI Friday. And then I went to a syndicated radio entertainment news production company called Unique. And all the time before I joined Radio 2, I was an entertainment producer and reporter, and we'd often be on the red carpet or at movie junkets at hotels, interviewing many Hollywood celebrities, musicians, actors in the theatre and the soap stars, all sorts. And I'm going to name drop a few just because my colleague Kyle, who's not on the call, but quite rightly, I always name drop. And these days it's getting harder and harder to name drop people that folk will also know because I'm at a certain age. So I've interviewed the likes of Lauren Bacall, Steven Spielberg, Patrick Swayze, Gary Oldman, Goldie Hawn, Paul McCartney, Noel Gallagher, Mariah Carey, met Kylie Minogue, Tom Jones, Lou Reed, lots of people. When I was at Radio 2 then, it was a personal radio career highlight. I obviously worked with a lot of the country's most well-respected and beloved presenters. In the main, right, for a number of those years. And I also worked with Steve Lamacq, Mark Millar, and did a few stints with Chris Evans, and also had the pleasure of producing the likes of Davina McCall, Lulu, and the former Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, when they all provided holiday cover for Steve Wright. And what these experiences taught me was a lot about how to navigate high pressure situations. There's nothing quite like the seat of your pants experience of a news story breaking at 2 o'clock and your show's on air at 3, and you've got to throw the running order out the window, either re-edit some of the content that you pre-recorded, or get it redrafted, or get another guest into the studio because whatever you're planning is now going to be out of date or might be bad taste because it's a sensitive piece of news. And meanwhile, you've also got there are 3 presenters in the studio with varying sizes of ego to make sure they're all happy and also hit the news, sport and travel bulletins, which are always important to the listener as well. And so in the main, what that taught me most importantly is how to keep calm in any situation, which is quite difficult when you're presenting today and it's not your comfort zone, and normally you're helping your clients do this. So I'm having to remind myself of taking long breaths. So as well as keeping calm, learn how to prioritize, manage expectations, which is super important, and also ask the questions. But most importantly is how to listen. These are the skills that I've carried onwards throughout my career, and they really have proven invaluable in my current role, working closely with CEOs and senior leaders to help navigate the issues and the challenges that they bring, and making sure that we're providing the best strategic counsel as we go along. So my transition into PR was driven by a desire to help shape stories. And following Radio 2, as Rod mentioned, I did work in Singapore for a few years, dipping my toes into PR for the first time, jumping inside that side of the fence, while also teaching kids to swim, which are 2 unusual jobs to combine, but great for working in the rainforest when it's super hot and you can get in the pool every day. Then I moved home back to Aberdeen 11 years ago and did my research, and everyone that I spoke to said, you've got to get a job at Big because they truly are the best in town, and they haven't proven me wrong. But it was a baptism of fire joining Big. Agency life is very, very busy and no 2 days are the same. And I had a lot to learn about the energy sector, but I soon realised that I didn't need to be the expert in thermoplastics or alternative maritime fuels or subsea control systems. I just needed to be able to absorb what the subject matter experts were telling me, translate this into messages and content that would then resonate with the different target audiences that they're trying to influence. And it does take a certain type of person to work in PR and for a PR agency for sure. Be good at planning, but also really enjoy that pressure of a deadline and thrive in a crisis. And I guess I do it because I really do enjoy that unexpected, urgent client request or a last-minute media inquiry with a tight turnaround. And then I also really love it when you're in the beginning and that creative process of helping develop a strategy that gets under the skin of what's keeping your client awake at night or getting them up super early in the morning, and developing that strategy to best support that. I mean, that could be anything from what Thomas was talking about, from launching a new product and helping to demonstrate the expertise that's within the team that's helped develop it, or it could be that strategy for internal and external comms to support a restructuring where there are going to be mass redundancies, and ensuring that you've got a strategy in place to cascade the information in the right order, and also make sure that your messaging is going to be authentic and transparent with your employees, so that they don't get, find out second, but also don't sort of get scared off and want to leave the business. The messages that are going to protect your reputation with your clients, give them an understanding of why it's happening and what you're doing about it and how that's going to impact them. And the same for your suppliers. And then obviously the media as well, how you handle either a leak strategy in place for in the run up to this being announced internally for externally, and then how you're going to message that to the wider audience. And again, it's that reputation that you're trying to protect as well. So another area I was going to say as well that's really taken off and that we've been supporting a lot of clients with is podcasting, which I obviously have absolutely loved because it's brought me right back into making radio programmes, albeit without the usual PRS licence in place, which means that you can use any kind of track by any musician. So being privy to all the big steps and investments that our clients are taking as they move or expand further into the renewable sector is truly exciting. And yes, I've met a lot of big celebrities along the way, which sounds super exciting, and it was. I have to say, when back then I would never have thought of working in PR or the energy sector, but now that I'm disinvested and so ingrained in what goes on, there really isn't a day that goes by where you're not learning super interesting things and clever ways that have been handled. Things have been handled to move things forward, and it's very inspiring. And it genuinely is a privilege to be able to be part of that and help bring these stories to life and share them with wider audiences. So that's a bit about me. And for those of you that don't know Big, been on the go it'll be 25 years next year, actually. And we've grown from a startup into one of the UK's most successful and trusted independent agencies. We've got offices in Aberdeen, Edinburgh, Glasgow and Manchester, but we've obviously, as my title suggests, got an international remit. I've got several clients that aren't even based in the UK, they're all international, and we support them with our strategies around the globe. We are an integrated agency, so what that means is we've got so many different services in our toolkit and a team of experts across areas such as myself in PR, marketing, design, public affairs, events, stakeholder engagement specialists, a whole host of different specialities that allow us to deliver those diverse engagement campaigns that deliver meaningful and measurable impact. In Aberdeen, we work on a lot of really exciting projects with clients across the breadth of renewables. And recently we've been involved in a lot of onshore wind consultation work that's taken us from Glasgow all the way up through the Highlands. We also work with operators and developers that are, heavily involved in spearheading hydrogen, carbon capture, and also floating wind. There's some amazing professional services companies in the mix as well, tech firms as well, using the latest AI tools to help with decision-making based insights as well. And for anyone who's seen our branding outside our office here in Carden Place, we're all about delivering big insights, big ideas, and big impact. So this is the expertise across here, just for a quick look. And this really is the beauty of having all these skills under the one roof. When a client comes in with a brief, we can make sure that we're not just siloed into delivering one aspect of the comms and marketing mix. We can really make sure that the tactics that we're recommending fit what they're looking to achieve, rather than being shoehorned instead, if you were working with one separate agency. For an example, if you've got a client that's presenting at an industry event, and the CEO may have a really strong view on paying for an advertorial opportunity in a trade publication that's a media sponsor at that event. And while an advertorial is great, it's a paid for piece of content that you completely control and write, and the editor can't change it because you've paid for that slot. It guarantees that will be delivered. But we're more likely to recommend a more strategic approach that will maximise that investment, because they can be quite expensive. And also they don't have that third-party endorsement of appearing organically in a magazine that an editor has decided that's worthy of their their audience to read. So we might suggest instead some editorial that has some thought leaders, a Q&A, some kind of profiling of whoever's speaking ahead of the event. Another idea might be a side event at the conference, such as a closed group roundtable discussion with important companies that they're looking to partner with or influence. And they might want to spend time with the media as well, having coffees to deepen those relationships. Other things they can look at might be ensuring that their website's got fresh content that, again, sort of reinforces that messaging around whatever the presentation is trying to achieve. You know, if it's demonstrating their expertise in renewables, it might be having some new case studies on the website, making sure that SEO is up to date, and you've got those keywords in place to help elevate you in the rankings as well. And other things on social media, part of that campaign could be vlogs, blogs, infographics, and additional information that are on unique landing pages that you push out through that social campaign, that can be both organic, so that's your content that you produce yourself, that you put up, or content that you produce and then put money behind for sponsored campaigns that can be targeted to reach people that aren't necessarily following the business. So you can target by job title as well as company and region. And not on that list, another part of the work that we do across the business is the 24-hour on-call emergency response support. So separate to crisis, you know, these are for clients that maybe have own assets and there's an emergency offshore and they need a media responder. And that's the shoes that we will fill to support clients for that. So go back to what I mentioned at the start, and that importance about understanding the pivotal roles that brand and reputation make, especially as companies head towards net zero and having that well thought out comms strategy. I thought I'd put a couple of quotes up here from Warren Buffett, one of the world's best known investors and successful businessmen. He's 94 and still going strong, and obviously gives great advice and would be quite a scary man to work with, I think also. But the point of sharing this is there are plenty of brands out there who have paid the price through mismanagement of social, ethical and operational issues that have fallen from grace. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I just noticed the time, but Shein's one a great example. The clothing label, obviously we know that their clothes are not sustainable, they're churned out, and the company hit the headlines last year for its poor working conditions and its supply chain. And the government's calling out, they're calling out for the government this week again to take a further look at them because they're trying to move on to the stock exchange. And the perception of the business isn't great, but they also know that their customers, some of them just don't really care and buy the clothes anyway because they're cheaper. But it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out, given you know that the fact that they are trying to hit the stock exchange, and it's going to put them onto that wider playing field. So businesses in the energy sector are equally judged for commitment to their sustainability, innovation and ethical practices. So I just wanted to make the point about, you know, using a considered brand narrative and clearly communicating values which can significantly influence how you're perceived and drive your company's success. And I just wanted to quickly say about what makes a client happy. I mean, it can be a million different things. It'd be keeping them in the paper, keeping them out the paper. It can be, you know, coming up with a white paper campaign that really sets them on the stage as a thought leader that then allows us to, you know, amplify that message out and get them on broadcast opportunities, and a sustained plan of different tactics to keep them in the audience's eye line, and that can be supplemented with advertising and all sorts of different marketing content. And we have great success in delivering those kind of integrated campaigns, which take in the marketing, all the collateral, as well as that PR and media relations support. So I'm going to hand back to you, Rod, because I have very much run over and run out of time, but just wanted to leave everyone with that last slide there about why it's important and the work we do, because it's, you know, it's looking at what's important in the sector, what's important to the business, tying it up, making sure that those ideas are going to work, and ensuring that you get that value through the big impact. So back to you, Rod.
Hello, thank you very much there for that very interesting presentation, Pam. I mean, you've had a very interesting journey, and it's great to hear of your own transition from the media sector to the energy sector. And I mean, it has to be said, with both hydrocarbon and renewable-based companies being the subject of both positive and negative commentary, it's great to have an agency like BIG on standby to kind of, you know, make sure that the right message gets out there. You know, as you say, you know, it's very difficult to change one's position in something instantaneously, and when things come out of left field, it's not always easy for the non-professional, someone who's not engaged in the media sector, to react appropriately. I know I would struggle, and I know it's great to have you guys on hand when I've needed to get a message out there in the past, both in my role with AREG and also as a lawyer. So thank you very much for that very, very informative presentation. Now, guys, you'll be glad to know you've dodged a bullet in the Q&A, because we've run over slightly, and I think that's great that we did, because there was so much good stuff there for our delegates to kind of take on board. What I would suggest is, rather than kind of hold everyone up from getting back to their desks, if anyone has a question that they want to put to the panelists, then if you pop it into the chat box before you drop off, and we'll make sure we get you an answer, and we'll publish that on the website where we're going to be hosting the presentations anyway, and that'll let you all get back to your busy days. But thank you everyone who joined us today for the Professional Services Network. These networks are a great medium for both members and non-members to understand a bit more about what's happening around the edges of the transition from the kind of traditional hydrocarbon energy sector to renewables. And it's not just about the hands-on and technical people that are very important to making that happen, but it's also the professional services guys that underpin that and give the support needed for those guys and get us to do the jobs properly. And so it's one big team on the transitional journey together. So thank you all for taking time out from your lunch breaks to join us today, and a very special thank you to Chloe for organising everything today from AREG, and to our panelists for their fantastic presentations. So I'll shut up now and let you get back to your day jobs. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Rod, are you still there?
Yeah, we've still got a couple of delegates just going to drop off, and then we can have a little
Okay.
workshop.
Okay.
Hi, Ines and Shun. Sorry, grateful if you could drop out, and thank you very much for attending today.
You dropped out.
I've still got James and Shun. And Ines. Chloe, are you still there?
I think she's dropped out.
Maybe it's. Do you need us? Or
In case you needed a wee wash up before
Yeah,
we
that's
close
super.
down.
Graham Shewan, I think, and James Lamond. I think you're the only two that's there. So you might perhaps, if you're struggling, let the organisers know, and they'll be able to perhaps remove you.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping Chloe might do. I think they're probably dropped off anyway. I think they've left their cameras off and muted themselves. So I'll tell you what, why don't we just drop off? But you know, again, heartfelt thanks from me for your efforts today. It's much appreciated. It's not easy to speak to a load of people online that you've never met, even though you are a media guru, Pam. It must still sometimes be a little bit intimidating going online. I find it is a bit intimidating. So thank you for your efforts. And we'll get this published online. We'll push it as well. We'll give it some shares just to kind of give you a bit more profile raising, because it's well deserved. And yeah, if we get any Q&As, we'll let you know, and we'll share those with you. And if you give me a response, that'd be appreciated. Other than that, I think that's it. Who knew that summer was going to arrive today? I've been sitting here squinting for the whole hour. I had my laptop set up. This is great place to do it. And then boom, the sun just went past the pillar and right in my face.
It's just because you are a sun magnet, Rod. That's what it is.
Well, I mean, it's making my teeth look nice and bright. So,
And for the record, you've got better legs than Steve Wright had.
Oh,
Much appreciated.
Jean, just to clarify, he showed us that he was wearing shorts earlier, nothing else.
right, okay.
You know what? It's the small wins. It's the small wins. I take great comfort in that. It's not
Oh
often.
Lord, Pam, don't fill that head any further. Folks, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all and to share the spot with you, Pam. So hope to do so again at another time, and we'll see you anon.
Right,
Brilliant.
all take
Thanks,
care.
guys.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
See you later. Bye.